Hi, I'm Quinn Costello with the SF Indie Fest Green Film Festival, and really excited to be here today with Kiki Gaucher and Ralph King. Kiki with The Grid and Ralph King with Crossing the Divide. Kiki, we'll start with you. It's kind of an interesting challenge to make an electrical grid story come to life. It's kind of an invisible thing that we're all completely dependent on using all the time. So can you kind of talk to me about what got you interested in this subject and what some of those challenges were in telling this story?
Well, you kind of pointed out the obvious challenge, which is that it's not a person, it's not a persona, but it touches all of us. I've been interested in energy for a long time, and I've been an environmentalist. So, I've been worried about our use of fossil fuels. I actually started this. The Grid is a part of a 4-episode series called Empowered, and Empowered for me is a celebration of all of the amazing people behind the energy transformation that we're living through. So for me, it's actually a point of joy. Like, I really wanted to share my joy of my new understanding of what's possible. And the Grid is about something that's been touching our lives, particularly here in the Bay Area, which is that we're realizing, particularly with the challenge of extreme weather, that our grid is not very resilient, and we've been dealing with power outages, et cetera. So the Grid for me is the story of understanding what it is and how we've taken it for granted. And it hasn't been, like you said, those power lines are there all the time. They're ubiquitous. We don't even notice them. And energy is something we don't notice. But when we've been without it, we've really noticed it. And that's when it's caught our attention. So the Grid starts with a power outage and shows us the solutions that we have moving forward.
And can you kind of talk about how the story came to life as you were starting to edit it, and how did you imagine it being structured? And were there any kind of surprises along the way?
I was trying to make it personal because for anybody who's lived, well, I think now most of the United States have experienced some power outages, but I wanted to bring in the human reaction and feeling that we have when we lose power, because we've taken it for granted, and we're finding that it's not a given that it's going to be that you're going to have power all the time because of all the challenges that we're facing. So I did a deep dive into energy, and I found it really fascinating, but I also tend to kind of geek out on technology and research, and I'm really in love with all the scientists, and I had a hard time backing off from not wanting to just tell everything that I know, and trying to, my greatest challenge was trying to boil it down to something that would be interesting, and have a full cycle resolution where we could say, okay, we see we have a solution for this, and there's reason to be optimistic.
And some of these technologies are a little hard to explain and a bit complicated, but it felt very kind of streamlined in the storytelling, which I appreciated. One of the tools that you use to do that is animation. I was wondering if you could kind of talk about your collaboration with your animator and how that came about.
I was really lucky to work with great animators, and and that's the first time I've worked with animation, and it's such a great tool, especially when it comes to something like science or these concepts, because trying to explain how electricity works. I mean, that's the first episode explains really energy and how electricity works. This is the second episode, which is really going back to the grid itself. Working with them was great, but it was one of these challenges where I'm trying to visualize something that really isn't visual, like saying, well, I need to show the electricity moving through the line, but in reality, we don't see anything and we don't hear anything. And so working with both animation and even with sound, they were adding little sounds. And a couple of times I said, Of course, the sound editors want to always add a sound, and I'd say, well, that sounds like disturbance. And the reality is, what I love about electricity is it has no sound. It's really no sound, no visual. So we had to add those components so that you could follow along.
And so what's next for this series? And do you anticipate, I mean, how many more films are coming along from you in this series? And kind of what's next, and how can we help get the word out about this film?
There are 4 episodes that are ready to go out into the world right now. This is our first screening, which is, you're just starting with number 2, which was kind of odd for us because it didn't start with number 1. But the other pieces in the series are, episode 3 is a deep dive into policy and how it has affected our ability to make this shift. And it's really a great story of how one town is transitioned, how it goes through these energy transitions and how it's coming out on top with offshore wind. And then the 4th episode is about, what do we do once we have all of our electricity generated without fossil fuels? And that's really those next steps of electrifying transportation and home heating and cooling, but showing Vermont as an example of, they've already gotten to that first piece. They already have 100% renewable grid, which is amazing. And after that, I have more episodes up my sleeve, because I'll never run out of people to celebrate these researchers and their technologies. I have other technologies already that I wanted to share, but just decided to put these first 4 out. This is going to be released in the first quarter through public television. So it will be available to everybody.
Okay. On KQED or?
It should be. Well, it'll be up to them. Public television, each individual station will decide what they want to do with it. But I am hopeful that KQED will pick it up.
It's kind of its own grid.
Right.
In a way. Decentralized. And just I guess my last question is like, as thinking about, just regular consumers of energy, what are the kinds of questions that you think people should be asking? And what kind of ways do you think people should be able to feel kind of empowered to rethink their relationship with electricity? And what are some of the kind of decisions that you could be thinking about at a consumer level?
I'm actually going to have a QR code, which will be, I guess I'll show it during our screening, but I can give it to you too for the virtual screening. But it will lead people to a website that has all the different ways to lean in and take further action. And that has a lot of what my desire is that people look at their own, take their own inventory of how they use energy, giving suggestions for how they can utilize this great opportunity with this new law. Every one of us can get some federal dollars to help us do energy efficiency, whether that's insulation, will help us if we want to lease or buy an electric vehicle, and just upgrading your own equipment. I'm taking out my gas stove, which I like, but putting in an all electric system. I hope to have a 100% electric house now that I have solar and batteries. So that's kind of like little steps first, and then eventually you can move on to the big steps. But there are little incremental steps everyone can take to reduce their energy use, which ultimately is the best. The best thing is to use less energy.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this story with us, and I look forward to checking out more in this series and learning more about our relationship with electricity.
Yeah, and check out our link. I'm sorry I didn't have something for you to scan today, but I'll have something.
Is there a website or something that we can?
Yeah, it'll be on the website.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ralph, I'm going to throw it to you so we can talk about crossing the divide. And before we get started, I full disclosure to the folks at home watching this that I edited this piece. So coming into it with a little bit more backstory than normal. But anyway, it's great to have you here, Ralph. And I wanted to kind of ask you to give us a little bit of background about how you met Ed and how you kind of thought that he might be a good starting place for a documentary.
Yeah, thanks, Quinn. Great to see you again. I and Kiki, I'm really fascinated by what you've had to say. I met Ed at up in the Dakota Access Pipeline. We were up there protesting a few years before this story, and it was in the snow, and he was with some folks and was talking about the situation in Iowa and these pipelines that were crisscrossing the state using eminent domain to carry oil around down to the Gulf. And so I kept in touch with him after that meeting and learned that they were kind of going on these, I thought of them as sort of SWAT teams, but they were just going out to these very rural places and getting together with farmers, trying to stop these pipelines from being built on their land and doing little demonstrations wherever the construction was happening. He seemed to have a lot of kind of guts and ingenuity. So when he proposed this idea about doing a march, he told me about it, and I thought, oh my God, this could be great. I mean, who knows what's going to happen? Maybe nothing. And thought of it as like the listening march. And I thought, well, this guy's open to opposing views, and that's very good. In California, we aren't exposed that much to opposing views. I think as so many of us are politically on the sort of the same side, but there in Iowa, it's a very different situation. So I thought, well, maybe something could happen. So that was how I met him.
And so this kind of core conflict that happens in the film with Darren, and was that something that was kind of expected? Was that a big surprise for you as you were along for the ride? And like, what was your kind of first reaction when he wrote up and wanted to apologize?
Yeah, well, when it happened, I think it was sort of terrifying to the marchers when they came in and saw this flag. And in my black little filmmaker heart, I was like, thank you, Jesus. But it wasn't surprising in the sense that we'd heard about this Facebook smear campaign that was happening against the marchers, and it's alluded to in the film. But it turned out later that this campaign was run by a security company working for the oil industry called Tiger Swan. And this company, Tiger Swan, had done a lot of sort of dirty tricks up in North Dakota at the Dakota Access Pipeline also. So these posts they put were full of inflammatory falsehoods, and they stirred up the conservative farm towns along the route. And someone like Darren pulls out his Confederate flag, and the neighbors light cherry bombs late at night. So, you could see kind of the straight line from the shit stirrers who were, industry aligned to this event that just appeared to be spontaneous, but wasn't at all. I mean, very similar to the January 6th events that have since unfolded, and kind of a microcosm of that.
And do you think, I mean, I know that you come from an activist background and a journalistic background. And so in kind of thinking about your experiences along the way here in Iowa and everything, do you personally have faith that it's possible to kind of bridge the divide, to have these kinds of conversations? I know, like, after 2016, after Trump and everything, there was this kind of intense hunger to kind of force to understand, to be able to figure out some kind of new way of talking. Do you feel more optimistic or more pessimistic that these kinds of things are possible at this point?
Well, maybe I'll answer that kind of through the protagonists in the film, Ed and Darren. it says at the end of the film that they pushed for water quality efforts in the state legislature afterwards, but not much came of that. Ed tells me, because the Farm Bureau and other elements of Big Ag, they wanted water quality initiatives to be voluntary. So of course they're ineffective. But these two guys still keep in touch, he said. And he says, we're on different side of many things in politics, but we often find common ground in our exchanges. He told me that when I talked to him recently. So, I think that does give me hope, and getting to know Darren a little bit. Here he was a conservative guy willing to take a chance. Now, it's true that he hasn't moved much, but it took a lot of guts to show up that next night, and then he agreed to the reunion. He agreed to sit down to our interview. So, he showed up as a human being, not as the reactionary that he appeared to be, or the really nasty guy who was, trying to really antagonize people. So I think, in my mind, at least, again, we live in this California bubble, but, I would look for opportunities to meet and engage with the Darrens of the world. And we've got an election coming up. So going to Nevada, Arizona, where people are less, a lot fewer people are believe the way I do, but to expose myself to other views. I just so I guess I have to feel a little bit more optimistic, even though there's a lot of evidence that we're farther apart than ever. So I guess I feel like, even though this film is 5 years old, it resonates kind of just as much today as then, and maybe somehow foreshadows kind of where we are.
Yeah, it kind of hits on a lot of the different things with social media, and a lot of the stratification, and a lot of the things that's just kind of revealed itself to be at the core of our inability to seem to be able to kind of cohere around a strategy around climate change.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about your work with 350 Bay Area and what's next for y'all there?
Yeah, well, we were affiliated with 350, but since we were so focused on civil disobedience, the 350 group sort of pushed us out because they felt it might threaten their nonprofit status, but that was fine. We've done a lot of nonviolent direct actions in the Bay Area, like we marched from Palo Alto to San Francisco, a 3-day march, and we've done blockades of banks, Wells Fargo in particular, and the big banks that are funding the climate crisis. And lately, we've been doing trying to get a group of kayakers, they call kayaktivists, in the East Bay, particularly in Richmond, where we're focused, because Richmond is where there's this giant Chevron refinery, and people have grown up in the shadow of that, and very high asthma rates, and know what it's like to be, in a quote unquote sacrifice zone. So we're trying to introduce kayaking to a community that's historically been excluded from this elite sport, and to use kayaks out in the water to raise awareness, so banners and formations and stuff, but then also potentially to disrupt operations. So the Bay Area is home to 5 big refineries, and they're allowed to kind of invisibly proceed doing what they do. And I think we want to bring it to an end, kind of what Kiki was saying about we've got to make this transition happen a whole lot faster. So a kayak may seem like a tiny thing compared to an oil tank, but so that too is like bridging divides. We're as an activist, our environmental groups that I've been associated have been largely white, largely privileged. And here we've gone consciously as a collaborative, where it's not a white space, and where we can, come together across, racial and generational and socioeconomic differences to work together on something like this more broadly. So,
well, thank you both so much for the work that you're doing, and thank you for sharing these stories with the Green Film Festival, and really look forward to seeing them in person on Sunday.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Glenn.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.